Hello, everyone. This is Snehal Contractor, Global VP of Sales Systems Engineering here at StellarCyber. Today, we're going to talk about how to be successful with the security operations in a downturn market. We'll break this up into a couple of different parts here. One, let's take a look at the current security trends, and then we'll take a look at how to address some of the stuff that we talk about here. So the first and foremost, take a look at some security trends. This is the state of cyber defense today. We're constantly asking our executive team for more tools, spending a little bit more on security operations, right? And security tools. And it appears as if we're constantly spending more and more money on these tools and looking for new ways to do things. This is the new norm. We're constantly being hit by some sort of a threat. A common one that every enterprise network is afraid of is being hit by ransomware. We've got a ton of tools already in place to address a lot of different threats. Why is this happening? Why is this the new norm? Everyone is afraid of being hit by some sort of a ransomware. It's not an if, it's a matter of when. To take a look at some statistics that we have about 4.62 million average total cost of ransomware breach. If we break that up, we're spending an enormous amount of time in just detection and escalations, manually writing security detections to find things. When we are breached, there's a ton of time, ton of money being spent on post-breach response, which is let's stop everything that we're doing today and go ahead and try to find out what happened, right? Go put measures in place so it doesn't happen again. And all of this leads to a ton of lost business costs. So given we have many of these tools in place, and these tools that you already have in place today, firewalls, IDS, sandbox tool, looking for anomalous activity in your network, SIMs, we're still being breached. Threats are still happening. So let's try to make the tools that you already have better. So some of the things that all analysts, all CISOs, CIOs have on the top of their mind always is, when am I going to get breached? So given you still have all of these tools in place, some of the challenges that we face day to day, one is I've got 30 different tools that are going to give me security detections in that relevant data set. For example, my sandbox tools will tell me that I have a ransomware that's been identified in my network. My firewalls will give me security events when we're looking for threats that are going in and out of your network, or even lateral movement. So the challenge becomes is I've got so many different tools to look at and look for different security threats. So one thing that we'd like to address is have a tool or a platform that gives me visibility across all of my different security tools in a central location. Or you might say a SIM can address that. Well, we'll take a look at that a little bit later today. The second one is many of the SOC analysts that I have today are constantly creating rules, creating detections to look for threats in my environment. So they're spending a lot more time creating rules, creating playbooks to look for threats versus we can have a platform approach and have these detections already built in, or use machine learning or anomalous to look for anomalous activity. The third challenge here, which we feel, and a lot of our partners and analysts are telling us, which is we have the data, we have the security events across those 30 different tools that I referred to here. The firewall does tell me if data has been exfiltrated, right? The IDS tool will tell me if I have a vulnerability that's been exploited. Checkpoint has great tools in place that allows to take a look at all of the lateral movement that's happening in an environment. Again, the exfiltration that's happening. But the challenge becomes, when I do find a threat in my environment, how do I recreate it? what I'm talking about there is one of my tools will tell me, yes, I have ransomware identified in my network, but I'm scratching my head again is how many devices have been exfiltrated? Was it 1? Was it 30? How did that threat get into my environment? Well, let me take a look at my EDR platform. It has the data there. Maybe one of those devices has been compromised. Has a user been compromised? Maybe I can take a look at another log set, right? I can go to my checkpoint firewalls and say, has that compromised device made a connection outbound? So the data's there. But again, amongst my 20, 30, 40 tools that I have, I need to some way and correlate it and piece it all together. Today, it's a very, very manual process. And in many cases, especially with large enterprise networks, all of those logs, all of that data has to be sent somewhere, maybe overseas. And then someone will recreate that, correlate all of that stuff manually and put it back together and let you know. Well, there's a lot of time that's passed at that point, right? And the last piece, which is when you do have a threat that's been identified, do I have to log into my checkpoint firewall and make a rule change? Is that another process in my system, right? Do I have to open up a trouble ticket? Or to reduce the dwell time, which is the amount of time that a bad person has when they're stealing data, right? Is can I take an action immediately? Or can I automate that action that when a threat is being identified from one of my tools, can I go to the firewall automatically and put a response in there that will block that traffic? So these are some of the challenges that we're seeing over and over in your security landscape today. Let's switch it up a little bit on how we address that. So there's a couple of ways to address it. A platform approach, which I've mentioned a couple of times, is one approach, right? So today, customers aren't looking for another tool or another product. They're seeking a business outcome, right? The digital transformation as we see it today, the work from home, continues to shape the service demand. Detection and response is something that's always on every CISO's mind, every SOC analyst's mind's day to day. Is do I have the detections in place? Can I respond very quickly? So a platform approach, we'll talk about in a couple of slides here on what it really means, and we'll use some analogies. But if you look at the trend here, right, from Enterprise Strategy Group, 67% agree that a standard architecture, an open suite architecture, where it puts all of the tools together is critical, right? 70% of the folks feel that deploying a extended detection and response, which is an XDR platform for threat management, is a must. That 70% may or may not surprise you. If you picked up any magazine outbound, went to RSA last year, 70–80% of the companies were talking about some sort of an XDR, and we'll focus on that today. So what is a platform? Well, let's go to a traditional firewall approach. If we took a look at the very, very beginning of firewalls, right, like a NetScreen firewall or a Cisco firewall, which had ACLs on it, it purely was to permit or deny certain traffic from one network to another, where it's inbound, outbound, or for lateral movement. If you take the analogy where fast forward today, a checkpoint firewall has much more additional functionality than simply allowing and disallowing traffic. It makes sense to add certain functionality in the firewall. Not only permitting and deny traffic, but let's add routing on top of it. So the firewall now becomes a layer 3 and above device. Let's add application detection on top of it, right? Makes sense. It's the core of your network. Let's add VPN. Let's add sandbox functionality because that's where files are seen also. Let's add IDS or IPS on top of it to look for exploit. It just makes sense to have these functionality or these additional features or tools inside the firewall, which now makes it a platform approach to a legacy firewall. A different view of it, your traditional antivirus devices, right? You load a little application on every single laptop or every single host. Well, it provides you protection against viruses. Did nothing more. If you take a platform approach of the antivirus tool, you have what's an EDR today, right? It not only gives you protection on that laptop, but it also allows you to have response mechanisms on top of it. So given those two analogies, let's take a platform approach to a security operations tool. SIM tools, traditional SIM tools like a QRadar, Logarithm, Alien Vault, do a great job of aggregating logs. That's what it was built for, and we'll define that in a little bit. The core reason for a SIM was to aggregate log. Now, fast forward, SIMs are trying to become a little bit more security savvy by allowing you to create some queries and detections in it to look for certain things. But if you take a platform approach to it, a SIM tool primarily looks at logs. But if you're already looking at the data, why not look at network traffic? Why not look at the user data there, as well as your logs? You've got SaaS applications, many SaaS applications today. Let's use API connectors to bring that data in. Let's have sensors or agents deployed on some of your critical servers to bring in the Windows event logs from it. Look for anomalous activity on those servers. So the idea is to provide complete visibility across your entire network landscape inside a single data lake, not only logs. So some tools, if we look here, today, isolated tools, just like we had the isolated tools we talked about earlier, are SIM. It's an isolated tool. Your network detection and response. Look for anomalous activity on the network. It's an isolated tool. All it looks at is network packets. SOAR is another tool that we have. What it's doing is working with all of your other tools to kind of provide security orchestrations as well as some response mechanisms. Threat intelligence feeds, right? You probably have threat intelligence feeds. What are you doing with those? Intrusion detection and so on and so forth. If we wrap that around into an open XDR security operations platform, all of those components would be part of a single platform. So you now have your traditional SIM capabilities in there, which will allow you to do your queries across all of the different data sources. Because you have network visibility inherently, like looking at the network packets off of the firewalls, off of maybe the mirror port, well, you've got that data. Why not apply those security detections and anomalous activity on top of it? Because you have the security detections now in that platform, well, we should have a mechanism to take response directly from there also. So it just makes sense to have these individual tools and all of that data set inside a single platform where SOC analysts can be a lot more efficient at looking at threats versus trying to write rules and trying to add additional data sources manually. We're going to switch the gears a little bit and talk about the biggest talk track that's out there, which is what is Open XDR? How is it different from SIM? Why is everyone talking about it? Well, take a look at the Gartner hype. It is at the top, right? If you look at this is published by Gartner. The very top thing is XDR, is Open XDR today. Every vendor probably out there wants to be part of XDR. So what is XDR? Let's define it a little bit here, right? And what's the need for XDR? When we talk to many of the CISOs globally, some of the CISOs for some of the large networks, they say they have hundreds of tools already deployed. Again, those tools do a great job at what they were purchased for and the data that they're protecting. All we want to do is bring all of that data together and have those detections common and have the correlation. So the case for Open XDR is this tool problem. We have way too many tools, way too many security vendors, completely out of control here, right? So what we want to be is make those tools a lot more efficient, make those tools a lot more better. So given you have this many tools, it creates a lot of complexity. First, too many vendors, a lot of upgrades I have to do. a lot of data. So now I've got, data coming in from a lot of different locations, which is just enormous amount of data for me to parse through, right? Too many secure alerts, too many licenses to deal with. And look at just the amount of DevOps, right, that we talk about. So first and foremost, let's talk about the definition, pure definition of what an XDR versus an ASSIM is. An XDR is a platform that integrates, correlates, contextualizes data and alerts from multiple security tools. It's made for detection and response. Versus a SIM tool, the definition is it's a technology. The main reason is for compliance and security by collecting data from various different sources. So one was built for detection and response, geared towards security. The other one was more for compliance. So to double click on each one, an OpenXDR is designed for outcome of detection and response again. It also meets compliance requirements because it does have a data lake for the retention policies. From a deployability perspective, you should be able to deploy it anywhere. It should be able to scale as you're adding more and more data. We talk about deployment flexibility, which is many cases you need on-prem deployment to keep the data on-prem in certain countries. But a SaaS deployment is much more easier for everyone, right? The data fusion is important. Data fusion consists of taking all of the data from all of the different sources. We talked about packets. We talked about firewall logs. We talked about EDR tools, SaaS applications. When you bring all that data in, you must normalize it. Otherwise, all of that data to an analyst is in a different format, right? Makes it, again, much more difficult. They're spending more time trying to understand the data. So as you bring the data in, normalize it, make it all look the same. Now, once you make it look the same, it has a lot more advantages to it. One is it all looks the same. I know exactly what I'm looking for. If I'm looking for a certain country or I'm looking for a certain threat or a certain IP address, I know exactly where to find it. All of my queries, all of my detection, my anomalous activity gets applied to all of the data sources, not only one data source, right? And then the built-in detections. An XDR platform will have hundreds and hundreds of built-in detections. An analyst, again, doesn't have to worry about manually writing detections. It also has machine learning built in there to look for anomalous activity across your network, across application usage, across users, across assets, to apply that machine learning across all of the data sources that are coming in, including the servers. Because now you have all of the data and all of the detections in a single data lake, single platform, correlation makes sense here. I know what the EDR logs are telling me. I know what the checkpoint firewall logs are telling me. Well, I can correlate the two because in the middle, I've got another device that told me that the device has been compromised. And that compromised device made an outbound connection, right? So I can easily correlate because I did all of the legwork up front, which is the detections and the normalization, and I've correlated it. Now that I found the threat, I should be able to press a button immediately and take an action or automate that. When I find a critical security event in my network, maybe a device that I've identified as a ransomware, why not go to the firewall immediately and create a block rule? Maybe I want to create it for a half an hour until my analysts have time to actually go and figure out what's going on, right? Again, reducing that dwell time. So I'll wrap it up here with everything that we talked about. Where were the effects on a SOC and the security program? One is retain your investment in the existing tools that you have today. Enhance those tools, make those tools better by working with each other. Improve the productivity by having automated response, machine learning to look for anomalous activity and detections that are built in. And the biggest piece, which is the correlation, which is bring all of those tools together and let me reenact the entire threat chain of events that happen. Of course, that improves results. And the last thing, hopefully, we were able to address the true differentiating factors of what a SIM is versus an XDR. And to summarize, an XDR was built for response, built for security, versus a SIM that was primarily built for retention. I hope this session was very, very informative. Thank you very much for taking the time.